All right, everybody, how's it going? It's Dennis Hendrickson here with Huge Tennis, testing out some equipment tonight. And I did have a question from somebody by the name of Adrian, who had asked me to talk about the swing path on the forehand. And it's actually really good timing, considering the fact that I am working on a course for the forehand. It's going to be called The Secret to the Forehand. It's going to be coming out very soon. I'm almost done with it. So I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of the forehand swing path with 3 different players, video-wise, analyze 3 of them, and kind of go through the differences, similarities, things like that. So again, Adrian, thank you for the question, and I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. So the first one I'm going to look at is, of course, Roger Federer. We have to look at his swing path because arguably one of the best forehands in the world. And even though it's Roger Federer, his forehand's going to be similar to all of the other pros that are out there. And anyone that's even like a 4 or 5 or higher NTRP rated person, who's playing in leagues, or a collegiate player, or someone who's more of a high level player in challengers, things like that. Basically, all the technique is really going to be very, very similar. There's going to be slight differences in style, but in reality, just about everything is almost exactly the same, and I'm going to go through that on each of these videos. So let's just start with Federer first. Now this is warm-up, and what he does is when he knows the ball is coming to his forehand, 2 things that he does. He's got the non-dominant hand here, which is the left hand, and grabs onto the throat of the racket. And as that ball starts coming to him, he starts utilizing his timing. And as the ball comes to him, he starts taking the racket back. And he's really good with timing, and better players, more advanced players, are going to be really good when it comes to timing on taking that racket back. Okay, so as he's taking that racket back, when it comes to him, right around the chest area is when he lets go with a non-dominant hand. Now 2 things happen here. When he starts to turn with his non-dominant hand to take the racket back, it in essence forces him to turn his shoulders perpendicular to the net as well as his hips. And as he lets go, he has to let go because he has to continue to take that racket back. The other thing in relation to the swing path is, notice the tip of the racket. The tip of the racket is pointed in an upwards direction. Most of the top players are going to be taking their racket back in that type of fashion. Not everybody. Some might have the racket tip pointed towards the net a little bit more, but you're going to see, as I show you the different players, the majority of them are going to have the tip of the racket pointed up. So he lets go of the racket, he continues to take the racket back, and as he takes the racket back, his hips and shoulders are still turned. They are perpendicular now to the net. He starts to go into the drop down. Okay, so now he's dropping the racket down. He starts to take the non-dominant hand and starts to clear away from his body. And so you see he's kind of spread his wings here. And as he drops down, now a couple of things start to happen. He's starting to uncoil. His chest and his hips are no longer perpendicular with the net. They're starting to uncoil and start to go back towards parallel to the baseline. When he does that, take a look at what happens with the racket. The racket stays behind. As he continues to turn, his wrist bends. This is racket lag. And this is really important. This is why a lot of players on the higher level have so much power, well, it looks like effortless power and a lot of topspin, and just makes their game look so effortless, is this racket lag. And this is extremely important when it comes to improving your swing and learning what the swing path is going to be for your game, is laying that wrist back and laying that racket back. So when you're turning out and you're starting to swing into the ball, this little wrist bend here and letting that racket kind of lag behind allows you to generate what's called racket head speed. And the racket head speed is going to allow you to add a tremendous amount of topspin and power at the same time. A lot of players, what they'll end up doing on the lower levels is they'll keep this wrist straight from here. They may not even turn their hips and shoulders and just kind of muscle the ball. But players like Roger Federer and the other players I'm going to go through here in this lesson lay that racket back and lay that wrist back. It's kind of like a whipping motion. So now here he makes contact with the ball. So he's come out of that whipping motion, and you see how he's turned his hips and shoulders, so he's stored all this power. He's laid that racket back, and now he's going to make contact. And as he's making contact, look how that racket is perpendicular to the court. And I have a lot of people who say, well, the racket is slightly turned on an angle down towards the ground. And I've seen enough of these videos and watched enough of these videos that on a neutral ball just like this, nearly 100% of the time, unless it's a mishit, the racket's going to make contact perpendicular with the court. And that racket's going to look exactly like this. Right after contact, however, right after that ball comes off the strings is when the racket now turns over. Now, before we go any further through the finish of the swing, look at Federer's arm. It's almost straight, not perfectly straight, but almost straight. You want to have enough distance between your body and the ball to make good contact. And your footwork has to be in really good shape in order for you to be able to do that. So you need to make sure that you move out of the way of the ball to make sure that you make good contact and that you have a straight arm. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but if you have a bent elbow and that elbow's too close to your body, you're not going to be able to make contact like this. And notice also now the chest is now getting more parallel to the net and to the baseline. He's clearing out his non-dominant hand. He strikes the ball. He starts to turn his wrist over. This is another very important part of the swing. When you make contact with the ball, the thing that you do not want to do is keep the racket face open after contact. The ball is going to fly off into the back fence. After contact, you want to turn that wrist over. And what that does is by not keeping the racket face open, it allows the ball to stay on its correct path. The other thing that I want you to look at is the elbow. The elbow is pointed down towards the ground. What happens going back to turning the racket over using the wrist is players will use their elbow and turn their elbow over to turn that racket over as opposed to using their wrist. And that's where a lot of injuries come about and where you have issues with balls flying into the fence or flying into the net, because instead of using the wrist and turning the wrist over after contact, players will actually turn their entire elbow over and use their arm to come over the ball as opposed to the wrist. Now let's go ahead and through the finish of the swing. The finish of the swing stays high, and Federer catches the racket with a non-dominant hand. And you can see now he's completely turned all the way to the other side. The chest is beyond perpendicular to the net. And there you have it. So that's Roger Federer. So as you can see, very nice, easy swing. He uses his entire body in order to generate power. And let's go into the next player, which is Novak Djokovic. Now, again, style's different, but the concept is the same. Okay, so he's going to be essentially doing the same thing that Roger Federer does. And what I mean by that is he's taking the racket back high with the non-dominant hand. What is he doing? Just like what Federer did, turning his hips and shoulders. So he takes that racket back with both hands, lets go. Now his racket is actually higher than where Federer's was. Again, this is a style thing. The technique is essentially the same. As he takes the racket back, it's around this area of his body where his head is. At that point is when he lets go. He gets into that semi-open stance. And now he drops the racket down just like Federer did. And as he drops the racket down, he clears out the non-dominant hand just like Federer. And as he starts to turn his chest out and the hips out, and he's continuing to clear that non-dominant hand out, the racket drops down, he lays his wrist back. Okay? So as he lays the wrist back, the racket's staying behind, for the lack of a better word. It's the best way I could describe it is he leaves the racket behind as he comes out of that coil. And as he comes out of that coil and he lays that racket back, this is where the racket head speed comes. And again, he makes contact perpendicular to the court. So here now the chest is parallel to the net and to the baseline. He's clearing out the non-dominant hand. He has a little bit more of a bend in his elbow, but the elbow is still pointed down towards the court. Okay, this again is extremely important. He's not turning that arm over. Now after he makes contact, he uses the wrist to come over the ball. As he continues to uncoil, he comes up the back of the ball, turns the racket over, and again, if he kept that racket face open, that ball would be flying into the fence or over the fence. But as soon as he makes contact, within a nanosecond, he turns the racket over. The ball has already left the strings. And as he turns that racket over, he starts to continue to clear the non-dominant hand out of the way, comes across his body, and the elbow now is pointed towards the net. So as you can see here so far, the swing path is essentially identical, but the style is different. And I have a lot of people on YouTube say, well, there's no way that you can emulate Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic. I completely disagree, 110%. You can do the exact same thing that Roger Federer does and Novak Djokovic does. You can do exactly the same thing when it comes to technique on the swing path, 100%. The only difference between somebody who's top 5 in the world is that they can do it time and time again. There are a lot of other factors that come into a professional tennis player's game that makes it, that allows them to be top 5 in the world. And that's fitness, mental, stability, being able to play in 5-set matches again and again and again. There's millions of other factors that go into the reason why somebody can be top 5 in the world and be a Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic. It has nothing to do at all with technique. If you learn how to do these things, these are relatively simple overall to do and to emulate. You can do these things. Doing it over and over again in a 5-set match at Wimbledon is a completely different thing. So I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that say you can't do this. You absolutely can. If you watch what I'm showing you, and you even come 80% close or even 50% close of what these guys do by simply using a non-dominant hand, taking the racket back, turning your hips and shoulders, taking it high, dropping it down and laying your wrist back, and turning your arm into a wet noodle and just relaxing when you come through that ball like this. The sky's the limit. There's a lot of different things that you can do, and you can practice this in your garage or in your house. You can use a towel and just lay your wrist back and whip the towel through just to practice laying your wrist back so you can practice that racket lag. And just go out there, and even if you drop a ball, like if you're on a practice court and you drop a ball and you do the same thing, don't even worry about hitting the back fence. Don't worry about hitting it over the fence. Just practice relaxing your wrist and just whipping through. I'm going to show you one more player, and then I'll call it a night. This is Nicholas Mahut. This is the guy who had the world set record with John Isner in Wimbledon. His technique, the same but different, and I'm going to show you the difference in his particular technique. Now, what Mahut does is when he takes his racket back, he doesn't take it back high. He just takes it straight back. But the concept, is the same. He's using his non-dominant hand to bring the racket back. It may not be as high as Federer or Djokovic. This is also a lower ball that's coming to him. He may have the racket a little bit higher if the ball was higher. But the idea is the same. Is when he takes his racket back, he's using both hands, turning his hips and shoulders, laying the racket back down, laying the racket back when he opens his hips and shoulders. So the hips and shoulders turn first. He lays the racket back. And as he's laying that racket back, that's nice racket lag, and then whips through, makes contact with the ball, and again, perpendicular with the court, parallel with the net, makes contact, and then as he comes through that ball, turns the wrist over. Now when he makes contact, he has an even more bent elbow. But again, what I want to stress is the elbow is always pointed towards the ground. He's not using his arm to turn the racket over when he makes contact. That elbow, as you can see, is still pointed towards the ground as he makes contact and comes through. And he's clearing out the non-dominant hand. Very fluid. Turns that racket over, swings it around, and again, just like the other players, the elbow is pointed towards the net after contact is made. Okay? So there you have it. So again, all of you that are watching out there, you can do the same thing, I promise you. Just go out there and practice that. You can go out in your garage, in your backyard, whatever it may be. Just go out there, take a racket, and just use your hips and turn your hips and shoulders. Just take a look at this video. I'll make sure that I post this. Take out all the delays and everything, but you can watch this and just emulate what these guys do. Take that racket back with a non-dominant hand, let go, lay it down, and just lay it back. Let that racket lag behind you. Or just go out to the court and drop a few balls down on the ground and just practice laying your wrist back and coming up the back of that ball and turning over with your wrist. Be absolutely sure that you don't use your arm to turn over, because that's going to be, an issue. But just come around that ball and just practice and trust the swing, and don't worry where it goes. Just keep practicing it over and over and over again to get used to it, and have fun out there. I appreciate you guys that are watching. I'm going to do more of these every week. I'm going to be doing live streams, just testing out some equipment to see how it works. Hopefully, it came out okay. And any comments or questions or anything like that, or if there's anything in particular that you want me to look to go over, let me know in the comments section. You guys always do, and I appreciate the support. I appreciate all the subscribers and people that are watching. It's really a lot of fun. I enjoy it, helping everybody out. So make sure you just let me know in the comment section what you want me to talk about, and I'll see you in the next live stream and video. See ya.